Good morning. This hearing session is now open. This hearing session forms part of our examination of the South Worcestershire Development Plan Review. This is day 6 of hearings. We are Philip Lewis and Elaine Worthington, the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination and to report to the councils in due course. The format of the hearing is that it will be a structured and focused discussion led by ourselves. At this point, just didn't ask the council just to explain any sort of housekeeping matters, fire exits, etc., please.
Thank you. So this is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and it is live streamed, and these recordings are available on YouTube on the channel at SWDPR. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you would deem to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. The lift cannot be used, and do not spend time collecting your personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed, and please make your way down to the main central staircase. There is another escape route to the north side of the building if needed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. I would like to remind speakers using microphones to turn them on and off again when speaking. And we find if you sit back slightly from these microphones and project your voice, it works quite well. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the council have any other housekeeping points to make? Someone's no? Okay, thanks. I was about to introduce Mr. Kemp, who's just disappeared out of the room. I'm sure you've all been in communication with Mr. Kemp. He's a programme officer, and he is the first point of contact if any assistance is needed. You may go now. Okay, very briefly about the procedure of the hearing. We'll normally start on a particular topic by asking for responses to questions we have, or indicating that we wish others to comment. As with previous days, we will move on from the questions we've posed in our MIQs, and we'll focus on areas where we have remaining questions. We've had a lot of information provided in the Regulation 19 representations and in written statements that have enabled us to move a long way on in our minds and thinking. But so we really just want to focus on the relatively few matters we have left to focus upon. So we'll indicate that as we go on. If you wish to speak during the session, please indicate this by putting your name board on its end, somewhere where we can see, and ideally with the name facing towards you, but we'll work it out as we go on. And in speaking, could you please be concise and specific? By all means, highlight any parts of your statements or evidence, ideally with the document reference, just for ease of our note-taking, so we can then look at them later on. These hearings are just part of our examination. It's a process that is both done in writing and through these hearings. To be perfectly honest, the vast majority of the work we do is really looking at what's written, and this is really the opportunity where we can get to explore certain things in detail through dialogue as necessary. Okay, so before we move on to our matter this morning, invite the councils to introduce their team, please.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to everybody. My name is Miss Suzanne Ormsby. I'm King's Counsel, and I'm the barrister representing the South Worcestershire Councils. So we've got a bit of a musical chairs over the next few days. So what I'm going to suggest is that each officer introduces themselves, and that as we change sites, as a new officer comes to the table, that officer then introduces themselves. So I'll hand you over to Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. Ian McLeod, I'm the Director of Planning and Infrastructure for Malvern and Wychavon District Councils.
Kieran Power, Head of Development Management for Malvern and Wychavon Councils.
Rebecca Buckley, Principal Policy Officer.
Emily Barker, Worcestershire County Council, Planning and Transport Planning.
Please carry on around the table.
Thank you. Fran Parmenter from David Lock Associates, representing Hallam Land.
Good morning, Owen Jones of LRM Planning, appearing on behalf of Law Homes. Richard Tesh, resident of Hadser, Secretary and Acting Chairman, Hadser Hall Residents Association, and Parish Councillor of Saywoe Parish.
Councillor Margaret Rowley, I represent Hadser on Wychavon District Council.
Catherine Laidlaw from the Malvern Hills National Landscape Team.
Sarah Jordan from Malvern Hills Trust.
Jonathan Bills, Malvern Hills Trust.
Susan Satchell, Malvern Hills Trust.
Thank you. Welcome to you all. So let's move on to the first matter of the day, which is matter 10, concerning the urban extensions proposed in the plan. I'll take this opportunity to just briefly ask a question to the councils. In preparing for this week and looking at the housing land supply issues, I've seen reference to developer questionnaires. Could you perhaps find the reference to that? Because I found some developer questionnaires in relation to, I think, an earlier exercise, but I'm not sure if we had those in front of us from the last time you asked them. Because in the housing land supply tables, it refers to the questionnaires. I've just wondered, if we haven't got the comprehensive set of those, if those could be suitably redacted as necessary and provided.
That's absolutely fine. We're preparing a full update for you of the 5-year housing land supply position, so we'll include the questionnaires within that update.
Thank you. That'd be really helpful. Okay, let's move on to policy SWDP 55, Kells Farm in Malvern. I'm hoping I got the pronunciation right. There may be some local pronunciation that is different, but if so, please let me know. Okay, start with the council then, Mr. McLeod. Can you just confirm what the present status of the site is? We've seen that there was a resolution to grant outline planning permission. Has there been any movement on actually issuing a planning permission on that?
Yes, sir. So we're in the final stages of the Section 106. It's been engrossed this week, so we're expecting that to be completed this week. So it's in the final stages. It's been signed off, I believe, by the applicant, and it's in, as I said, final stages of now completion. So it should be signed off in the next few days.
Thank you. And in terms of the likely delivery of the site, is there anything you can add and update us in terms of the next stages for that site?
It's an outline consent at this stage, but my understanding is the developer is looking then to obviously move forward as quickly as possible. It's probably a question for, we've got David Lopp representing them here as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I can confirm that the county have signed the 106, the landowners signed the 106, and it's now back with Malvern Hills to engross, and we hope a decision will be forthcoming this week because conditions are also agreed. There is a agreed position to help 5-year supply from this site. So we've agreed a reduced time limit for submission of reserve matters to 2 years. There are no pre-submission of reserve matters conditions either. So the structure of the consent is such that we can get reserve matters in quickly. So we fully expect to see delivery 26, 27 probably commencing, and then probably completion within a 4-year period. I'm not sure if that is the most recent position on the developer survey, but I think we're comfortable with what was in the trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful. And that's probably answering some of our later questions as well, but that is a useful update. Mr. McLeod?
Yeah, I was just say, so that reflects the position within our 5-year housing land supply with completion beginning 26-27 and the build out complete by 29-30.
Okay, so a couple of points following from that. I think I may have asked this before, but just could you just confirm to us when the planning permission is issued? I think it would be quite useful to have a copy of it supplied as well. And if we want to refer to the nature of the conditions, etc., that will be it's all part of the evidence, isn't it, for looking at delivery. Thanks. So, having heard that, I think we'll work on the basis that the purpose of the policy is there to deal with any potential variations through the life of the plan, following the outline, the consent, and to be there to guide reserve matters. Yeah, okay. We'll work on that basis then. Right, so we posed a question about whether the proposed site would be sensitively located and designed to avoid or minimise adverse effects upon the Malvern Hills National Landscape. We have the council's view on that, close to granting the planning permission, accepted, but it's an opportunity for people on this side of the table, or that side of the table, if you wish to say anything at this point, or if things moved on.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll take just the opportunity to sort of reiterate what was in our representation and also in our representation to the outline planning application. So obviously planning permission has been granted and we objected to it, but we are working with the council going forward on the outline application. But yeah, we'll take the opportunity just to reiterate that Natural England also did object on the basis that there would be harm to the national landscape, both in terms of landscape character, as well as the visual effects, and also significantly on the triple SI, which maybe sort of Malvern Hills Trust can elaborate on. But even though there is a reduction from the initial 400 houses at 200, even Natural England raised their objections to that figure based on that there would be significant harm to the national landscape, but also that the applicants, the developers, LVIA, also concluded there would be significant adverse visual effects, and this was also sort of highlighted in the evidence base for the plan in terms of the environment study, which showed there was no capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the National Landscape have any views on potential impacts on triple SI? Am I right in remembering that you're content at this stage, but it's the future iterations of the plan?
Yeah, so the concerns with the triple SI is from primarily recreational pressure, which even though we're working with the councils and partners, including Malvern Hills Trust, who manage the land on a mitigation strategy, but ultimately it's that recreational pressure and the numbers that are resulting in the degraded current condition of the treble SI. And yeah, sort of any amount of mitigation is going to be sort of difficult to reduce that harm. Ultimately, it's the numbers and sort of having alternative areas of recreation that will reduce the numbers on the hills.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, Mr. McLeod, on the triple SI point?
Yes, so obviously we took this into account both in putting the application forward and in reviewing the application. We were satisfied it was the smaller site that was put forward in the plan for 200 homes, which kept a degree of separation to the north and a buffer with the triple SI, that the impacts on the triple SI would be mitigated.
Thank you. You've not got the board up. It's an opportunity if you want to say something about that.
Just to say, in terms of mitigating the effect on the triple SI, it's very early days. We've only had one meeting chaired by Natural England as to the suite of measures that might be necessary in order to mitigate the effect on the triple SI. So it's very early days. What they're saying is it needs a strategic solution. That is not in place at the moment, but it is something that we would like to work towards, and that Natural England say will be necessary as part of this plan. So in terms of Cales Farm, it's sort of come along before we are fully aware of what we require to mitigate successfully, but it will depend on a whole suite of options, but we will be led by Natural England's experts on that going forwards.
Thank you. Do you have anything further to add, Mr. McLeod, on that?
Not to add unnecessary details. There's obviously been discussions with Natural England on this point, so it wasn't a point of principle. It's more about details then of how that mitigation is taken forward.
Thank you, sir. What I would also say with regards to this allocation, the lower density of the site affords a higher GI, and part of the aim of that, as well as mitigation against Malvern Hills in terms of visual impact, is that those who have dogs or would like a short walk, rather than going on to the Malvern Hills, the hope is that they would use the areas within the allocation to walk their dogs to reduce impact.
Just to say, also in the 106, there's a contribution towards any forthcoming recreation strategy to provide mitigation for that when a strategy is prepared by Malvern Hills.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the next question then. Does Council have anything else to add in respect of its comments on the transport network? I think particularly in terms of the fact there's now almost to be a planning permission granted.
Nothing further to what we set out in our response.
Just provide an opportunity for anyone else to make any comments on the transport implications. No? Okay, thank you. We posed a question about whether a decentralised heat network would be justified, and the Council proposed a main modification to delete that, along with a few other main modifications that make some deletions to, I think, in terms of public transport, for transport contributions, cycle footpaths, and biodiversity corridor. I think that's it in this totality, main mods.
I think we just put the word approximately in as well for 200 dwellings, but that's correct. The decentralising heat point was when we were looking, I think, at a larger site rather than the smaller allocation that came forward.
Okay, our final question is about whether the site's deliverable or developable. We've more or less covered that, I think, in the answers we've had early on. So if no one has anything further to add on that, I'll just give people the opportunity to, if you've come along to discuss something that's not in the questions, this is your opportunity to raise it about this site. But I think maybe not, because the status the site almost has in terms of planning permission. I think we've got what we need in the questions, but it is an opportunity for anyone around the table.
I have listened to the approach that you intend to take about main mods that consider additional numbers. But as you've asked, I just wanted to say that in our written submissions, we have put forward a proposition that the site could deliver additional homes. And that is through the LVIA work and the evidence base that we've prepared insofar as transport and drainage and other matters. And that is still applying the before modification provisions that relate to protection to the SSSI and the national landscape. So, but I appreciate you've made your point around dealing with additional numbers. So I'll leave it to our written submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, on that note, in terms of numbers, just to highlight that both ourselves and Natural England objected based on 200 on the basis that that would still result in significant adverse effects on both landscape character and the visual effects, and sort of part of that is obviously the condition of the SSSI. So regardless of how much recreational space is available on the site, given the proximity to the national landscape, the protected landscape, there's also the concern that this would not also sort of comply with the new duty, or the enhanced duty on all relevant authorities to further the purposes of protected landscapes.
Thank you. It's okay. We used to once give a warning about telephone fees, didn't we? But I think it's just part of natural life now. It's just one of the occupational hazards. So.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, in terms of the extra numbers of houses, given that this strategic solution hasn't been agreed yet, it would surely be using the precautionary principle, the thing to wait until that is in place, all parties are agreed on it, and that we've got that tool in our armoury before increasing numbers or passing any more planning permissions on houses. It would seem a wise thing to do to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything, Mr. McLeod, before we move on to the next site?
I think our position on the larger site has been set out, and we'd agree that the landscape's impact on the SSSI was more significant, obviously, from the larger scheme, which is why we reduced the site area. So we're satisfied with the position we put forward.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next site then. Policy 56, North East Malvern. Start with the council in terms of the deliverability of the site. Am I right from our reading that it's an outline planning permission with access approved, everything else reserved, not in the 5-year supply? Is there anything else to add on that?
No, so, well, so that is correct. So outline plan permission was granted received in 2015, and outline planning application, sorry, was received in 2015. The resolution to approve that was in 2022. So we're now been working through the highway complications, which has taken some time to resolve. Pre-application now for reserved matters has been submitted. and the applicant is continuing discussions with the County Council regarding Section 278 works for the site. And we're in discussions with the applicants around a PPA in terms of the detailed consent.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then, there's a main modification proposed to deal with the issue of proximity of existing cricket pitch, requiring a ball strike assessment, and also addressing matters about playing fields to be consistent with national policy.
That's correct. So the main mod B43 relates to the priority habitat, and we've also got a main modification in relation to I'm going to get the terminology wrong, but it was a ball strike assessment.
And there's also a main modification suggested in regard to priority habitat. Yeah.
That was the one I referred to. So that relates to the protection and enhancement of any priority habitat. I won't read it all out, but you've got it all there.
And the final question we asked was about the potential impacts on the transport network. That, I think you would say, has been addressed through the planning permission.
That's correct. So we're satisfied that effective mitigation can be put in place for this scheme. So this is more the details now with the County Council around the 278 agreement itself.
Thank you. Anyone else around the room with respect to that site? No? Okay. We'll move on then to policy 57, land at Hanbury Road, Droitwich Spa. Start then by asking the council briefly to explain how the site was selected and how the boundaries of the allocation were defined.
Thank you, sir. So obviously it's a proposal for 300 homes to the east of Droitwich. As you'll be aware from some of the earlier discussions in the hearings, obviously Droitwich has significant areas of greenbelt. This proposal isn't affected by greenbelt itself. Droitwich itself has been extended significantly to the south with a number of major allocations coming forward there through the last plan. We see this as an opportunity for an extension to the east of Droitwich, relatively close to the town centre, and providing direct connections back into the town centre, which is within close proximity. In terms of the allocation itself, the western boundary is being defined by the hedgerow, which is there currently, taking account of the conservation area, which runs through the canal, and obviously the listed building as well. The listed building has seen some development to the north, around 70 houses were granted there on appeal, and the boundary again for this site reflects that. So we feel there's clear boundaries for the development, which are defined by topographical features on the ground, taking account of the heritage and landscape impacts of the proposal.
Thank you. Mr. Tesh?
Fine, thank you very much. The issue before the inspectors is whether the process followed whereby this site was included in Regulation 19 was legal, and if so, was it sound? My contribution this morning relates to documents submitted to the inquiry by the South Worcestershire Councils in response to the questions raised by the inspectors. The SWDPR should be evidence-based. I aim to demonstrate there are significant inconsistencies in the evidence presented by the councils. Taking question 178 first, was this selected on a robust basis? The first sentence of the council's submission starts, and I quote, "The site was put forward to the Regulation 18 Preferred Options consultation as an emission site by the promoter, Ainscroft Properties. This accords with the aim of the preferred options, which was to allow both the South Worcestershire Council's favoured site allocations to be scrutinised and for alternative sites to be put forward to consideration. This site, the Hanbury Road site, was never included in the Regulation 18 contribution dated November 2019, after the earlier Sheila answered no as to whether it should be carried forward for potential allocation to the SWDPR. The emails supplied under the initial Freedom of Information request indicate the promoter, through their agent, was treated preferentially by the council, whilst residents in the community were excluded, deliberately so in the 6 months prior to Regulation 19 being published, when the councillors were instructed to keep the proposal secret. The scrutiny process was therefore inadequate, as it did not involve the community." The councils then go on to say, quote, "Two sites to the east of the M5, CFS 0320 and CFS 763, were also ruled out on the basis of access being isolated. Therefore, having considered the limited options of reasonable alternatives, this informed the decision to include the proposed allocation in Regulation 19 publication consultation. CFS 0320 relates to land at Beacons Lane, Hinton-on-the-Green, Evesham, while CFS 0763 is Ash Farm, Sedgeborough, Evesham. Neither of these sites are anywhere near Droitwich and are therefore not relevant to this matter. However, CFS 0310, land at Hadser, adjacent and including St Hulbert, is relevant, where the Sheila says the site is greenfield and there are no significant physical or environmental constraints limiting development, but does lie in open countryside. However, the site is separated from the town, which is Droitwich, by the M5 and is isolated from services and facilities in the town. Development of the site would set a precedent of extending the town beyond the M5 in an unsustainable location. This site is separated from SWDP R57 Hanbury Road by a country lane and the entrance to the Hadser Hall development. There does appear to be a clear case of inconsistent assessment. Moreover, there are other options if indeed there is a requirement for such a site to meet the overall housing requirements. The number of proposed dwellings in Regulation 18 for Union Lane, also known as the Baxenden site, was 600, but representations highlighted this was unrealistic, and the council accepted this. The subsequent assessment resulted in 400 dwellings, the number in Regulation 19. The council submission goes on to say, quote, consequently, this led to a shortfall in the provision of the overall numbers for Droitwich Spa, which is considered to be a sustainable location under the development strategy. Therefore, the proposed allocation site at Hanbury Road was selected and considered suitable for a medium-sized allocation to support the housing supply position of the plan, and the figure of 300 dwellings was preferred. The council's, the council's element at Union Lane was highlighted following public consultation. Yet the Hanbury Road site has not been included in Regulation, has been included in Regulation 19 without earlier public consultation, whilst attracting opposition from bodies including the Droitwich Town Council and the Civic Society. So here Union Lane was amended following consultation. Hanbury Road was put in without consultation. There were 4 sites within or adjacent to Droitwich, none on the east side of the motorway, all on the west, that are not in the SWDP review, but where planning applications were either approved before publication or pending but now approved. 127 dwellings at the Chateau Impney, 57 or 58 at the Raven Hotel, and anybody locally knows all the issues of the Raven Hotel. 22 originally and now 27 flats at the former British Legion site. 91 dwellings at Hampton Lovat. The original scheme was refused, but revision was approved earlier this month. The first 3 schemes total over 200. The reduction of Union Lane, whilst all 4 come to around 300 and therefore equal to the Hanbury Road site. Including some of these would negate the need for the Hanbury Road site. Union Lane is a brownfield site where the previous industrial buildings were demolished 10 years ago and the land became available for redevelopment. However, I'm not aware that any planning application has been submitted to the present day in what should be an exciting redevelopment opportunity close to the town centre. The council appears to have a particular problem with managing brownfield sites, which do require a more specialised expertise. The councils have a 20% contingency over the calculated demand of 11,000 dwellings, which is higher than the normal 10%. The additional 10% contingency equates to 1,100 houses, or approaching 4 times the number proposed for the Hanbury Road site, again suggesting this proposal is not required. As mentioned 3 weeks ago, Droitwich has seen its population quadruple over 60 years, from some 7,000 in the early 1960s to approaching 30,000 now. There seems to be a mindset within the plan for perpetual growth of locations that have already accommodated significant past increases. There appears to be limited strategic thinking about the future of the town by the relevant council bodies. One realistic option is to pause the expansion of Droitwich, concentrate on the schemes already in the pipeline, and consolidate the past growth. This can be achieved within the existing numbers, without the need for SWDP 57 land at Hanbury Road, Hudson. not only on a micro and macro level, but conceptually, Droitwich has already sufficient sites without the need for Hanbury Road. It is also further note that Wychavon has not shown this site within searches for local purchases as recently as late 2024, as the house on Hadser Hall development that was completed in January. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. McLeod, do you want to respond to any of those points?
Thank you, sir. So we're comfortable from our side that all correct procedures have been followed. This came forward to Regulation 18 as an emission site, and particularly in response to, we've got obviously a discussion on Union Lane to come, but the numbers at Union Lane had to drop significantly on the back of some of the historic environment constraints of that site. So this proposal then was considered, it was considered through the Sheila, it was looked at in terms of the transport assessment and ESA, and we put forward a smaller proposal at Hanbury Road. So this, and that was quite clear at the Regulation 19 stage. So there's nothing procedurally that is inconsistent with how this site has come forward for development. We believe the access improvements necessary to connect this site into Droitwich can be delivered. There's potential for improvements for pedestrian access on the B4090, which provides a direct connection into the town centre, about 1.5 miles away. So, you know, it's good proximity to the town centre, and there's also potential for improvements for footpaths and direct links to the towpath canal as well, again, offering sustainable connections back into the town. Obviously, we've talked about within Droitwich, and we'll come on to talk about some of the brownfield aspirations. You know, this is a balance between obviously meeting our housing need by identifying brownfield sites. Union Lane is an allocated site for a significant number of houses, which we'll come on to tomorrow. And similarly, we're taking other opportunities at the Raven as well. We're looking at how that site could come forward, again, promoting brownfield redevelopment. The housing numbers, you know, are significant, obviously, which is why we're having to look at other allocations, but we feel Hanbury Road very much is a sustainable location, which will provide good access into Droitwich for the residents that live there.
Councillor Rowley?
On that last remark, I mean, the connectivity into Droitwich is very poor from that area. I had a resident from there who had an electric wheelchair, wanted to get into the town. The footpath is very narrow, encroached by the bank against the canal. And again, it's on the other side from where the development is. It's very difficult to see how they're going to get a footpath because of the positioning of the M5, which doesn't leave sufficient room. The towpath is very steep and not suitable for general use. It certainly wasn't suitable for an electric wheelchair, nor anyone who's disabled. And also, while we're on the access from the traffic on this historic saltway, when it gets into Droitwich, it's always congested. And I cannot see that there are any proposals have been made by the councils to improve that junction. They just say that they will improve it, but it's very difficult to see how that can happen without demolishing buildings.
Thank you. I mean, we will be undertaking a site visit, and we'll endeavour to look at those things and walk some of those routes when we do that. Thank you. Mr. McLeod, any points on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, the footpath improvements are what are needed for this site. So we're not suggesting the current arrangements are appropriate. This is a significant allocation for 300 homes, but there is certainly in the work that we've done potential for significant upgrades there to deliver that better connection that is needed into Droitwich.
Okay, thank you. Tyler Parks.
Thank you, sir. I think Mr. Tesh has stolen much of my thunder, I have to say so, but thank you. It was just really coming back to the point that, you know, the Regulation 18 stage, albeit a larger site, was rejected amongst other reasons for its location east of the M5, separated from the town, with raising issues of connectivity and extending Droitwich Spa beyond the motorway. You'll see for yourself, sir, the site hasn't moved, nor has the M5. So why this about change, albeit for a smaller site, is a real concern to our client. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Marans?
Thank you, sir. You'd expect me to come back at some point, no doubt. Mr. MacLeod's said pretty much what I would expect him to say, and I recognise exactly the matters around the selection of the site that he's shared with you, and also the consideration for the issues at hand. So I won't repeat any of those. I'm also not about to explain to you the difference between Regulation 18 and Regulation 19, and what may be the appropriate point to introduce an allocation and an allocation boundary. It's also fairly common in my experience, and no doubt others around this table will have the same experience, for sites to appear and disappear as you work your way through that narrowing of the funnel, as I describe it. You heard me describe it that 2 weeks ago as you prepare a local plan. The comments about the Sheila rejecting, sorry, the site being rejected at Regulation 18 relate to the then Sheila commentary, which was commentary made in the context of the housing numbers at that time, and the package of sites being put forward at that time. That, of course, as people on this side of the table have referenced, was at a time when Union Lane was expected to deliver 600 homes. Now, I went through the essay last night and I won't repeat all this, it took some time. The sustainability appraisal correctly identifies issues such as connectivity, such as the hall, and of course those things have been talked about again on this side of the table. Whether they're issues or not doesn't necessarily determine whether they're a problem, and it doesn't determine the significance of any issue if it is indeed considered a problem, and it certainly doesn't undertake a balancing exercise to determine whether or not it's appropriate to make an allocation in a particular case. As you move your way through the Regulation 19 stages, of course, Union Lane does change, as you know. It's entirely appropriate for Droitwich to receive growth. Again, I won't repeat Mr. Cloud. The town is heavily constrained to north, south and west. There are issues of connectivity, that's quite right. We've been exploring those with the council. We don't consider them to be a significant issue or barrier. They're capable of being mitigated. Again, I won't bore you with it, but I'd be happy to take you through our walking and cycling strategy for the site, which looks at the distances, looks at the perception of those routes, and looks at the possible upgrades and mitigation that may be required. Of course, that's all work that we're undertaking to support a planning application, which will be submitted shortly. And you'd expect it to do that, because there are issues with any site that need careful consideration and a reaction through mitigation as part of the design proposals. So from our perspective, the site has been put forward through due process. Its selection is robust. I appreciate that we're skipping around the questions here a little bit, and no doubt we'll come on to some of them in a little while. But I've not heard anything from this side of the table that would alarm me or lead me to think that we've missed something. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Tesh?
Well, I think David picked up the point I was going to make towards the end. This question is whether the site was selected on a robust manner and not whether it's got connectivity or whatever. It should be on whether it's selected robustly. And the residents feel that since the councillors were told to keep it secret for 6 months, there are major issues on it.
Thank you. We said at other parts of the examinations that we're examining the Regulation 19 submission version of the plan. What happens in plan making is a matter for the councils and local communities. But it has some relevance through considering what's in the sustainability project, how we've got to that point, but we are examining what's in front of us. The questions you raised about consultation, we've already discussed in the first session here when we talked about statement of community involvement, etc. But we'll add these comments into our considerations on that and take that away. But just really the focus here needs to be on what's actually in the plan before us, because the Regulation 18 version isn't the plan that was submitted. And the comments made at that stage aren't comments for us to consider. It's just part of the procedure, but I've got the points. We've got the points in writing as well, and we'll consider those as necessary. But I do have your point about, going back to our question, whether the site was selected on a robust manner. And I've got those points as well. So I think we can move on from those more general points now. Move on to whether the site's deliverable and developable as for the framework definitions. Maybe Mr. McLeod, if you could start by outlining the council's position. I think I'm right in noting it's included in the 5-year housing land supply. So what we really want to hear about is what is the sort of evidence that, considering what it says in the planning practice guidance, that we need to consider to agree with you what you've put forward in the 5-year supply for this site.
Thank you. So the SHLA correctly concluded there were no physical constraints on this site. And you're right, we see this site coming forward fairly quickly with delivery beginning in 26-27 and then continuing firstly 50 dwellings in 26-27 and then 70 dwellings for the subsequent years. Certainly discussing with the promoter, we feel that is a reasonable trajectory for the site. There's no major constraints on the site which would stop it coming forward within that time frame. So we believe it's both deliverable and developable.
Thank you. What's the current position in respect of intentions for development? Is there any evidence you can point to that of work that's been done in preparation of the planning application, or is that merely a question for Barron's?
It's probably a question for Marins, but there's ongoing engagement on that matter. But I'll let Marins answer that.
So thank you. Yes, we've been working with the council on the preparation of planning application again, as you might expect. I know we'll come on to talk about education. Education's been the single issue that has delayed the submission of the application. It would have been in by now if it weren't for some of the questions that you've seen being discussed and raised in the statement of common ground around education and the future of the school on the site. We have largely completed a technical pack to support the planning application. Our current working target is for the application to be submitted at the end of May. We consider that we can achieve that. Obviously, we continue to have conversations with both councils around the location for the school, which will be an important matter for that application itself. But certainly, from our perspective, the application is there or thereabouts and ready to come in. I'll make a very brief comment on the 26-27 delivery of 50 dwellings. You'd expect me to do this as well, and I certainly made reference to this in the first week of hearings. It is possible for us to see homes delivered in 26-27, but that would take some effort by all parties to move forwards on the application in earnest. We have been having conversations with the council about the planning performance agreements and what the timescales might look like for that. As I say, it is possible. Whether it's probable might be a different matter. But what I will say is that we're working together collaboratively with both Wychhaven and the local education authority to resolve the matters and identify a way forwards. And certainly at this point in time, we're quite comfortable that we have a working practice between the three of us that we're not falling out and there's nothing alarming happening in those discussions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Is there a home builder involved yet, or would the site go to market once you received, should you receive a permission? I mean, this is all on a without prejudice basis, these discussions. It's the nature of having to pose these questions, but...
There isn't a named house builder yet, sir. There is interest in the site. The site would have to be subject to a marketing process, yes.
Okay, and just to confirm, the date for start of delivery is possible, not probable. And so we can take that away. I mean, it just helps us in when we're working out questions about 5-year supply.
I think that's fair, sir. I mean, I don't want my words to be, I'm not suggesting you're twisting my words. It is possible. Whether it's probable will depend on the conclusion around the planning performance agreement and the allocation of resources to make it happen. That's a matter for the council. As things stand, you know, we are enjoying a collaborative relationship. There's no doubt about that. So I'm fairly comfortable about the future prospects for that planning application. But as we all know, you know, planning is difficult. We're sat here with objectors who are taking a keen interest in what's happening, and rightly so, they're permitted to do that. So it is possible. Whether it's probable will depend on the twists and turns that we take as we make our way through that process.
Thank you, that's helpful. Mr. McLeod, anything on that point at the moment? Or?
No, I don't think we've got anything further to add.
Thank you, Mr. Ted.
My contribution is going to be very much shorter to this question. The council say, quote, the site allocation is a smaller cut of the original land parcel submitted by the Shaler call for sites by the promoter. There is real concern based on documents within the Freedom of Information response that there is a hidden agenda ultimately to have a development of 600 or even 800 dwellings. The current 300 is considered to be just the first phase. I trust the inspectors agree with residents and others that there should be no hidden agendas within a plan such as the SWDP review.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod.
I don't think there's anything I can say. I mean, quite clearly that isn't the case. So that's all I'll say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and there's the nature of these things and the contributions we're getting, we're inevitably wandering into some of the other questions. I think we've already had the council's view on sort of spatial planning implications of allocating this site to the east of the M5 motorway. And I think other people in the room have touched on that as well. But I provide the opportunity, really, if you want any more to say on that. Now's your chance. Have you covered off the question about the development on the east of the motorway?
My contributions are specific answers to the questions. And I don't particularly want to mix them up because each question is relevant and needs a specific answer. Okay, well, the way it works for us is that if questions are answered earlier on, we can generally move over them, but this is an opportunity for you to, if you've got something prepared you want to say about question 181, very happy for you to read that now, Mr. Tesh. So we're on 180, are we now? 181 now. No, we've done 179. I don't think we've done... Well, I've got more to add to 180 because we seem to have taken 179 and 180 together. But if I can add to 180, the council's quote, further, the South Worcestershire councils have been working to prepare an SOCG, which is a statement of common ground, between the relevant parties. That also includes Worcestershire County Council as local education authority. The SOCG provides clear evidence that the site is deliverable and developable as defined in the glossary of the NPPF National Planning Policy Framework. There are, however, a number of errors, inconsistencies, and questionable elements with the SOCG, which can be summarised by, first, 2.2, the site is accessed off the B4090 and served by public transport. There is a bus service along the B4090 on 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, with 2 journeys in each direction. The earliest arrival time in Redditch is just after 10 a.m. and the last departure is 13:10. For Droitwich, the earliest arrival time is 11:15, and last departure 12:30. At the time of producing the SWDP some 10 years ago, I recall the County Council had 9 criteria for bus services. For example, whether they enabled passengers to get to work each week by 9 a.m. and leave at 5 p.m. This service comes nowhere near achieving 1, let alone a minimum of 3 of the then criteria for an acceptable bus service at a new development. 2.2 goes on to say, and pedestrian connection can be achieved along the Hanbury Road. There is currently no footway on the southern side of the B4090 along the whole length of the site to the motorway bridge, although there is on the northern side. There is also a stretch on the western side of the motorway bridge with no footway. The topology and land, along with private ownership, could create considerable difficulties in constructing any southern footway into Droitwich. Residents of the Hadser Hall development have been trying for 20 years without success to get improvements to the existing footway by the motorway bridge, as regulations restrict work to the arrangements protecting the bridge. 2.2 goes on to say the nearest supermarket approximately 1 kilometre to the west. The 1 kilometre measurement has been taken from the eastern edge of the site, nearest the motorway. However, there's no site access at this end without traversing third-party private ownership, and even then you couldn't put a roadway in. The actual distance to the supermarket would be 2 kilometres or more, depending on site layout. The distance to the supermarket for CFSO 310, already mentioned under the previous question, is given 1.4 kilometres. So there appears to be an inconsistency in measurements in a like-for-like basis. And the town centre of Droitwich Spa is approximately 1.3 kilometres, and following from what I've just said, this is more like double than that given in the SOCG. 2.4, the site is in single ownership and has no technical barriers, is available, suitable and achievable. The site may have saltwater springs and potential draining issues. It is of note that the Hadser Hall development was specifically built on the higher land, although some buildings on the boundary with the proposed site have had to be piled because of the ground conditions, even though they were supposedly constructed on land more stable than that within the proposed site. Point 6, also in 2.4 figure 2, shows the full extent of the land ownership submitted to the Regulation 18 preferred option consultation in 2022 as an omission site and then included in the Shaler. The Regulation 18 preferred option consultation was in November 2019. The 2022 consultation was the Regulation 19. Point 7, 3.2, being located for access to employment and services in the town and further afield, with opportunities to link to an existing public transport, e.g. Droitwich Spa railway station. There is no footway on either side of the Saltway leading to the station, from before the fire station warning lights to the Domino roundabout approximately a quarter of a mile away. Point 8. 3.3, the Infrastructure Delivery Plan, exam 40, has been updated and the highway improvements removed and submitted to the inspectors ahead of the hearing. What does removed mean? Does it imply that all the earlier work identifying several million pound work needed along the B40190 traffic light junction is too problematic at this stage and has been deferred until any planning application? The principle of development of the site, point 9 on 4.1, the principle of the development of the site as proposed by policy SWDP 57 is agreed and considered to be consistent with MPPF December 23 and PPG as demonstrated through the evidence-based work underpinning the SWDPR. I understand this inquiry is working on the basis of policy applicable when Regulation 19 was developed, not 2023. However, policy 2023 was that brownfield sites were to develop in preference to greenfield sites, which were only to be used in exceptional circumstances. I'm not able to see any exceptional circumstances for this particular site. Education, however, the WCC preference as education authority is to now address education provision via a developer contribution. We have moved from a two-form entry first school where new residents children would occupy 25% of the additional places, through a one-form entry, if educationally viable, with 50% of the places for new residents to developer contributions. The inspectors may detect I have a somewhat sceptical view of this statement of common ground. However, I believe one officer may have a stronger opinion as he signs himself as head of Panning, Worcestershire City Council.
Right, if you got to the end of that one, right, if you turn the microphone off then, please.
Sorry?
Have you got to the end of that point?
That's the end of question 180, I think.
Okay. You could turn your microphone off, please.
Right.
Thank you. Mr. McLeod?
Thank you. So I'll try not to repeat myself, but I don't think anybody on this side of the table or with the developer is saying there's not a need for improvements in terms of accessibility back into Droitwich, but we feel there's potential to deliver that. And if you look outside, there is a pavement to the north-hand side of the road on the B4090. There's potential for obviously improvements on the southern side as well. And then the fact is that this is a site, very close to the town centre, less than a mile walk to the town centre. If we can improve those pedestrian accessibility, which we believe we can with cycling and walking, that means it's very close to the town centre within nearly 2 kilometres of a railway station as well. So it's a very well located development, and with appropriate mitigation, we feel that it is a sustainable location. The transport modelling is sort of going on to other questions, but obviously we've looked at that in detail. There's a mitigation package which has been put forward. I know you've got a question on education later on, so I'll save that for then.
Okay, thank you. Tyler Parks?
Thank you, sir. My comment was with regard to question 181. Realise we've jumped backwards and forwards a little bit, so...
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. It was just a point on the council's response to question 181, and part of similar justification is that this housing development has already traversed the M5 motorway. Just a point, really, the papers are before you with our substantive comments, but just to bear in mind that in the Secretary of State's decision there, quite clearly states at paragraph 131 131. The only reason why planning permission may be appropriate in that particular instance is because the site was previously developed land. The site allocation for SWDP 57 quite clearly isn't. It's greenfield, open countryside. Thank you.
Thank you. Murrens?
Thank you, Inspector. There's quite a lot there, isn't there? And I don't know how much you want to hear from me, so I'm happy to take a bit of direction. I think that we are jumping around quite a lot, hence me asking for your direction in what I do now. There were comments on deliverability, the spatial arrangement, geo-environmental matters, heritage, education and highways. I'm happy just to give you literally a couple of sentences on each now.
Yeah, I think that'll be helpful. I mean, actually, I really don't mind it jumping around because it just makes it easier when we get to the other substantive points, because the people, we pose specific questions about certain things we want answers to, but actually it doesn't really matter how we get to the end point at the end of the discussion, provided we get there. So.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. I'll try my best then, because it's definitely not easy keeping hold of all the different pieces, all the different moving parts, you know, in one lump. But here we go. We had the conversation about whether or not the site's deliverable or developable, and I'm conscious you didn't specifically say, whilst it might be deliverable within 5 years, when will it be deliverable within 5 years? And I think, well, I don't think, I know our position is the site is deliverable. It will happen within 5 years according to the programme that we've got to work to. Quite simply, if it doesn't happen within 5 years, then AIMSCO Strategic Land doesn't make any money. That isn't a very sensible business model for a strategic land promoter. So I just wanted to make that point. My possible comment is actually about the trajectory. But your question, is it deliverable? Our view is yes, it is. Spatial implications. I appreciate you'll undertake a site visit. There is already development to the east of the M5. Of course, in that area, we've got the Hadser Hall development, and of course, we'll no doubt have a conversation about the impact of that on heritage issues nearer the time. But there is, of course, that development to the east, and you've also got the football club and the marina, and then heading eastwards along the road, you then arrive at a sort of series of buildings around the pub, which is further along. There is development in this area. The issue, and I think I've been quite even-handed about this, is around connectivity and what do you do with that man-made barrier of the motorway. Well, it is permeable, it is possible to get routes under there, and we have a package of emerging mitigation, which deals with crossings, footpath improvements, tactile paving, drop curves, all the things that you would expect to see in the development management process. But I appreciate you wouldn't expect to see those now. Excuse me. I don't recognise the distances that were given to you for access to the supermarket, and certainly they're not corroborated by the application pack I've got in front of me. I made reference to the walking and cycling strategy. The distances are somewhat less, and they're certainly within the preferred maximum walking distances given by guidance. I'll try and move swiftly on, but we may end up circling back. Comments around brine. Well, I've got a geo-environmental survey. I appreciate it's not submitted to the examination yet because it's a development management document that would be attached to the planning application. That doesn't find any evidence of brine. We had the other participants, I was going to call them objectors, but that's unfair, the other participants' comments, and of course we went away and checked, as you would hope we would do, because we need to undertake due diligence. There's no point pursuing a proposal of this magnitude if we've made a mistake. There are no records, and there are no records held by Minerals and Waste either. Just touching quickly on heritage, reference was made to the hall and the development around the hall sitting higher. You'll see for yourself when you visit on site, the hall is indeed prominent. There's no denying that. But the hall is surrounded by development. Its principal facade of interest is on the western side, which obviously faces Droitwich, as it would have done from that elevated position looking out across the town. It isn't the northern facade. And of course, views south from the north towards Hadser Hall are seen against that backdrop of modern development. And again, loops back round to this idea of the spatial arrangement for that part of the landscape east of Droit, which does have development in it. Just on education, we'll perhaps come on to this and hear from the county as local education authority. We have a direction of travel to determine whether or not the land requires to be safeguarded for a school site or not. We're quite happy to have that discussion and that dialogue. That was something that we talked about with the councils from day one, the potential for this site to support and assist in the delivery of education places in the face of a capacity issue. I don't want to put words into the county council's mouth. They have some work to do in terms of trying to work out the point in time the capacity is needed and whether or not they can meet capacity through reinforcement on other sites. They may be able to do that. They may not be able to do that, and they might require this site. We have a working direction of travel, but the answer to that will be determined during the lifetime of the development management process. If it is a site that needs to be safeguarded, we can do that, and we've consistently said that we can do that. If it's contributions, then contributions we will make. I just want to touch very quickly, finally, on the idea that there's some sort of secret agenda around the land that's available. Our original SHELAR submissions, which are in public domain, showed the extent of the land holding, and it extends as far as the canal, in the east, I should say, as far as the canal in the east. And indeed, depending on how you develop that, it could accommodate 600 homes, it could accommodate, I don't know, if you went high density and you didn't have any service facilities, which might not be sensible, it could be 800, I don't know. But there is an extensive land holding, which we've been very open about. You will know better than I, SHELAR is one of the raw materials for plan making. We've engaged in that process. The council have published those findings, and the council have then used that to determine the package of sites that they've selected. There is no secret agenda around that. At this point, I've sort of been reminded of my time in local government advising members when we write local plans, and of course they would say, we said no to this site last time. This is obviously a matter for another plan making process, but it's quite possible, of course, that the land to the east will be reviewed again. It's in the SHELAR, as indeed are hundreds of other sites that will be reviewed and considered again for another plan making process that considers housing requirements and the need to meet those housing requirements at that time. So I don't think there's been any secret agenda at all. We've been honest, as you would expect us to be, about the land holding that we have under control and that we can make available to the plan making process. I am minded of comments made by my colleague David Locke on behalf of Palmland about the need for additional land. We have indeed said that in our Regulation 19 representations to this process. There is additional land, and if there was a need to consider the potential for further sites, of course we would expect to be part of that discussion. Whether or not ultimately we were selected or not depends on something happening within this process or indeed a future plan making process. But I don't think there's been anything underhand or secretive about the manner in which we've engaged with the statutory plan making process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McLeod, anything to say at this point?
Just a couple of points. Just to reinforce about the brine, we've checked the brine maps as well, and that we couldn't see anything running under this site. The Hadsall Hall appeal decision was nearly 20 years ago, so that was obviously a significantly different set of circumstances to which we are dealing now in terms of housing delivery. And just to make the general point again, Droitwich is significantly constrained by green belts, so it's sort of where do you go in terms of the expansion of Droitwich? And you've got heritage assets to the west, green belts to the north and south. This is, from our perspective, about how you can connect this site back into the town centre. That's the challenge with this site, and we believe there's sufficient opportunity for us to mitigate those impacts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rowley?
Yes, the Hadsall Hall development, I have to add, was an enabling development. There was a large industrial factory building there that was demolished. The hall was restored, and the development was particularly designed in a sort of quadrangle fashion, with imitating the previous development on the site, which was with stable blocks and that sort of thing. and there's also the listed church as well. And the view from the motorway and from the canal, you see the open parkland, which is the farmland which we're talking about, with the Hadser Hall development around the hall, and the hall stands out prominently. So I think it's so important to maintain that farmland around the Hadser Hall development for that reason. And while I'm on that topic with question 181, I have to say that Droitwich has recently expanded mainly to the south and the west. This area to the east is a few scattered settlements, Sir Hambury Wharf, Hadser, Shernal Green, Dunhamstead. They're all attractive rural category 4 hamlets. To put large development in that situation is, to my mind, totally inappropriate. This is a rural setting, and it's so important to keep that setting for Hadser Hall and indeed for the canals, which are also conservation areas. They're very close to the site. So I think it's entirely inappropriate that we should have modern development in that situation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tesh, do you have anything to say on our question 181 about the spatial planning implications of the allocation of site beyond the motorway? I mean, most of the people have commented on it already, and that will take us up to our mid-morning break.
Yes, I've got additional information to add that's already been given.
Okay, if you can focus on the additional then, and there's no need to read what you put in your statement.
Sorry?
There's no need to read what you put in your statement to us, so just focus on what's additional to what's been said, please.
Well, it all flows. The council says, quote, in terms of SWDP 57, Hanbury Road allocation, housing development has already traversed the M5 motorway into the adjoining parish of Hadser, with approximately 71 dwellings being approved. Consequently, housing development has already moved beyond the M5 to the east. There are in actual fact 79 dwellings, not 71. As already presented in evidence, the inspector in 2002 wrote, these schemes, there were two applications totaling 79, cannot form a precedent for other growth or development in open countryside. Then adding growth to the east side of the M5 would be precluded by national planning policy. It is inappropriate for the councils to use this development as a precedent. A redundant concrete and glass office block built in the 1970s and described as a contender for the world's ugliest building, not my words, but those in 2003 of Ross Clark in the Daily Telegraph, was replaced. Earlier inspectors have specifically said it should not be seen as a precedent. This proposal to build on agricultural land currently being prepared to plant spring wheat in open countryside needs to be justified in its own right. The councils had earlier said the Copcut Lane allocation has now established development going beyond the developable and defensible boundaries created by the A38 Roman Way bypass and into adjoining countryside. One significant difference inter alia is that much of the traffic generated by the Copcut development travels along the A38 bypass to the motorway or neighbouring towns and cities, whilst the vast bulk of traffic from SWDP 57 will be into Droitwich itself and the already congested B4090 traffic light junction. The council adds, therefore, in the context of spatial development, the proposed allocation is considered to be justified with the planning constraint opportunities and existing patterns of growth described being supportive of development east of the M5 in this location. There is a lack of strategic thinking about the future of Droitwich. Is SWDPR 57 a one-off speculative proposal to build in open countryside, or is there indeed an official strategy for future growth of Droitwich on the eastern side of the motorway? Will there be any answer forthcoming?
Thank you. Marins, did you want to come in or?
Thank you, sir. I promise I'll be very, very brief. Mr. MacLeod quite correctly mentioned the age of the appeal decision. It goes without saying that was some time ago under a different set of national guidance and a different approach to significantly boosting housing supply and meeting local housing needs. So I won't labour the point on that, but what was said then may indeed not be the right answer now. I just want to touch very, very quickly on heritage, and I promise I will do this quickly. Last night I said I had the pleasure of reading the sustainability appraisal and thinking about the task that the council have had to go through. There were 27 sites which had a minor negative impact on setting of listed buildings. Further 21 sites that could alter the character and setting of the conservation area have a minor negative impact on the local historic environment. Hadza was one of those, Hanbury Road was one of those. Obviously in the context of all those sites in the sustainability appraisal, looking to appraise reasonable alternatives and try and help the council decide what they prefer. The sustainability appraisal is quite correctly picked up heritage constraint. I do have, and again, appreciate it hasn't been submitted to the examination, but I've got a copy of our heritage impact assessment. It talks about some of the things I mentioned a moment ago, and I won't reiterate those. But in terms of those views from the north looking southwards towards the hall, I mentioned the elevated position, sort of oblique views, not necessarily of the elevation with the greatest character and the most important part of the setting. But you've got hedgerows along that part of the Hanbury Road which do filter the views, and they're sort of glimpsed, for want of a better phrase. Obviously, those views also are framed against the backdrop of that modern red brick sort of housing estate, which does mean that the parkland setting's been severely eroded. Our heritage impact assessment, and I appreciate this hasn't yet been tested by the council, but recognises that the views make a minor positive contribution to the setting and significance of the hall. And overall, we think development would bring about less than substantial harm at the lower end of the scale in terms of significance, the sorts of tests that you would be familiar with, of course, in the development management arena. So from that point of view, again, issues, we recognise that there are constraints that need to be taken into account in bringing development forward. The way that we're looking at those through the process to prepare the application is consistent with the process the council's been through and the harm that they've identified through the sustainability appraisal process. And I would submit that it is bound to be, because we are looking at the same heritage asset and the same heritage impact. So I wanted to just loop back round on that, sir. Apologies for taking a little bit more time than perhaps was necessary.
Okay, thank you. Mr. MacLeod, any points to come back on?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. But certainly in terms of the SHILA and the SA, neither document identified any significant impacts on heritage assets. Conservation officers, the council identified no issue, and Historic England have not objected to this scheme.
Okay, thank you. Right, now 11 o'clock. I think we will take our mid-morning break. We'll come back at 11:20. Those people that need to be somewhere else and have made contributions to the items you came to make contributions in Melbourne, thank you very much. Probably like to see you tomorrow. Yeah, okay, thank you. So we'll resume at 11:20. Okay, we've heard some material today already about the transport implications of the proposed allocation. Just start with Mr. MacLeod, if you wish to very briefly explain the council's view on this, and then we'll, no need to repeat what's already been said, but we'll open it up after that.
Thanks. So obviously we've modelled the site through the strategic transport model, and a number of highway improvements are suggested on the back of that. And I won't repeat myself about the need for obviously pedestrian and cycle improvements linking the site back into Droitwich. But on the basis of the modelling, that shows that with a number of mitigation measures, that the traffic impacts from the development can be satisfactorily mitigated.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tesh?
The Council's response lists some of the measures that will certainly be required to prevent increased congestion and avoid safety hazards were this proposed allocation to go ahead. However, this substantial local knowledge and recent evidence suggests that solutions will be substantially more problematic and significantly more costly than any desktop study or assessment can come up with. For example, the B4090 is the preferred route for heavy goods vehicles to access the Saxon industrial estate and its surroundings at Stoke Prior, Bromsgrove. This will have to be recognised when designing any site access, which will highly likely to have to be well to the east of the rugby club and further from the town itself. An issue at the traffic lights is that three of the approaches have twin lanes, whilst the one along the Saltway is a single lane. There is a complicated queuing theory calculation, which I used to do when at university, to recognise the random nature of cars turning right onto Queen Street. It can sometimes take 5 or 6 sequences of the lights to traverse less than 100 yards. Furthermore, the HGV can also occupy both lanes at the other approaches, thereby reducing flow further. There's a lot of articulated lorries going along to the Saxon industrial estate and big articulates for Waitrose and Morrison's traverses. Past calculations put such a cost in excess of 2 million, plus the acquisition of businesses in their land, because the road will have to be widened if these problems are to be solved. As mentioned previously, there's no footway along the southern side of the B409 from the eastern boundary of the site to the motorway bridge and then somewhat further into Droitwich. Provision of footway is necessary, and residents and those attending any school will have to cross a busy road carrying HGVs. While some of these costs may be met by developer contributions, it's difficult to see from where and how the rest will be forthcoming, particularly after tomorrow. In addition, residents will hope the Highways Authority have recently updated their modelling software, as they well remember that only recently we are probably on version 5 of the road layout at the Copcup Elm Junction, whilst at the Oldville Fernal Heath there had to be modifications when it was discovered articulates could not traverse the junction at more than 2 miles per hour. So there's been quite a history of bad traffic management locally.
Thank you, Mr. Tesh. Mr. MacLeod?
Thank you. So as I've said in my previous answer, there is a need for some localised widening on sections of the B4090 Hanbury Road to the west of the M5 and the junction with Ainslow Avenue. So we don't believe the cost of that, the widening and associated improvements to footpaths, as I previously mentioned, is anywhere near the 2 million mark. We feel that the general improvements that we've calculated to make this site accessible from a transport point of view are around about £500,000, which we would say is normal for a site of this size. But as I said previously, when the modelling was undertaken with those mitigation measures put in place, the traffic impacts were found to be mitigated.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next question that concerns heritage assets. Mr. MacLeod, could you just explain how the councils are taking into account the significance of heritage assets in forming the allocation?
Yeah, thank you. So this was obviously a key component in how we identified this site. And as I said in my answer to the first question, we're obviously aware of the canal, which is a conservation area to the east, and the actual Azar Hall, which is obviously a listed building. I said in response to his previous assessments, the 70 or 79 dwellings, obviously to the north of Hazar Hall, does affect its setting. And we've obviously taken that into account as part of the assessment. But we believe that the impacts on heritage there will be no significant impacts on heritage arising from this proposal. So, and that we haven't had any objection to this scheme from Historic England, and our own conservation team have looked at the site obviously in detail as well, and their view is that the impacts can be mitigated.
Thank you. Mr. Tesh? Go, Councillor Rowley.
Yeah, it's not only Hadser Hall, of course, that is a heritage asset. There's the canals of Worcester, Birmingham, and the Droitwich Canal, Junction Canal, they're close by, and they are conservation areas. And it's an attractive area for visitors because of the rural nature. And I'm afraid that this particular proposal will destroy that, make the area urbanised and detract from those conservation areas. The Hadser village, of course, itself is a conservation area, and the juxtaposition of this particular development will destroy that ambience of that particular village and the unique Hanbury Wharf area as well as a unique conservation area. Thank you.
Mr. MacLeod, so what have the councils done in actually looking at particularly the conservation areas around the canals?
Yeah, so if you look at the proposal and where we've taken the eastern boundary of this site, we've deliberately gone to the field boundary, which keeps the setting of the canal. So we've kept a significant buffer there, really, from where this development will end and to the canal itself. So the original proposals and the proposals put forward in the Sheila were obviously for a bigger site. But by keeping that buffer, we believe that provides a satisfactory mitigation for the canal. So we're very much aware of that in looking at the boundaries of this site. And the policy itself then, obviously, just to lay Councillor Rowley's concerns, also talks about the settings of both the listed building and the conservation area. So and clearly there is a need to mitigate those impacts as part of this scheme. But I just refer to my previous answers, no significant historic impacts arising from this development were identified either in the essay or the Sheila.
Thank you. Murrens?
Thank you. So you've heard from me on this already, so I promise this time I definitely will keep it brief. Quite right, there are other heritage assets. Heritage impact assessment picks up on that, as you would hope. I think there are around 10 designated heritage assets from memory, of which the church is one, and indeed the canal is one. In particular reference to the canal. The canal is a linear feature that runs through the landscape, as indeed they are wont to. Our heritage asset finds there's a neutral impact on that for the reasons that Mr. MacLeod's just given. But that doesn't mean, of course, that we won't take it into account when we're looking at the detailed design proposals through the development management process. I'm not sure if I mentioned in my last answer part of the mitigation proposed by the Heritage Impact Assessment is for view corridors for the hall. So I just wanted to very quickly mention that. Of course, minor impacts and harms are picked up by both the SA, which is before you, and the Heritage Impact Assessment further application, which I appreciate is not. That's very different to some of the emotional language you've just had about destroying character. Of course, that would be substantial harm. We aren't talking about harm at that significance at all. It'd be quite improper for us to arrive at a view that we were destroying significance of any of the heritage assets, actually. So yeah, risk of repeating myself. Minor harm, lower end of the scale. Just very quickly as well, I wasn't necessarily going to come back on the comments that Mr. MacLeod quite correctly made about the highways, and you'll forgive me for this. We've been looking at the junction that we've just been talking about several times at the Queen Street and Salt Way. There are different ways of mitigating that junction. It's quite correct that there can be queuing there. Again, traffic modelling shows that. But there are schemes to mitigate it, which include widening the junction with land take, or indeed different white line arrangements and different signal timings. And in particular on the signal timings, it's pretty apparent from the modelling and when you delve into it that the junction arm does clear during at least one of the signal timing periods. Now, if that's the case, it's possible to clear the junction all the time. So that's something that we're looking at through the development management process, again, as you would hope, something that we're quite comfortable that we can deliver. The figure that Mr. MacLeod gave you for £500,000 for a scheme for the junction improvements is about the figure we've got. And of course, that's quite different to the £2.8 million strategic transport modelling figure, which relates to a wider package for a wider series of development impacts. That's all for me from now, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have made a note, and we will go and have a look at that junction as well. Mr. Tesh?
I think you've just answered one of my questions. You're going to do a site visit, are you?
Well, we will do a number of site visits. In fact, we've already been doing some site visits. So what we'll take from these sessions, useful actually to do. We've had a sort of general look around parts of the area already. What we'll take from the sessions are detailed points from people, and if we feel it's something we need to go and look at, we'll go and look at it, on the ground. But yeah, we are planning to do that, and it's useful actually making notes of things where we ought to go and see as we go on.
Fine, I welcome that. To clarify, there are 5 listed assets at Hadster Hall. The hall itself listed in 1952, St John the Baptist Church listed in 1969, the tomb of 4 members of the Galton family listed in 1986, retaining wall with balustrading archway and gated piers listed in 86, and Delpoo Shrine also listed in 86. There's also the historic Worcester to Birmingham Canal with 2 listed bridges in Hadser, and the Droitwich Branch Canal, both of which have expansive views of Hadser Hall and the church. Those from the Droitwich Canal would be particularly impacted by the proposed development. The council say, finally, I also note that Historic England have not raised any objection to proposal allocation in its representations. I am waiting Historic England to come back to me to confirm the precise wording used in their Regulation 19 response regarding SWDPR 57. Whilst the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I believe a large majority would consider the views of Hadser Hall and St John's Church over agricultural fields would be far preferable to those over the rooftops of a housing estate.
Thank you. Mr. MacLeod, anything to come back on?
Just a point of detail, but you'll be able to see this on your site visit, sir. But obviously the residential scheme has significantly affected the setting of the hall compared to the allocation. So the views from the facade to the west are completely clear. The views from the canal are completely clear as well. So the impacts on the setting, the material setting to the north has obviously been affected by that development for the 79 houses.
Thank you. Maren, do you want to come back in?
Thank you, sir. Just to make the point, I mean, Mr. Tesh said five designated heritage assets of the hall. That's broadly correct. There are 10 surrounding the site. There are none and no designated heritage assets within the site. So what we're talking about here are assets that surround the site itself. And the question of whether or not there's an impact on setting and significance. You have my answer on that already, but I just wanted to make the point. They're not within the site. I think, you know, again, some of the language that you're hearing is that we're right on top of these things and taking them away. And of course, we're not. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. We'll now move on to our final issue in respect of this site. We've had some discussion already about how the requirements for education will be dealt with. I think the most efficient thing to do would be to go straight to the County Council, who can perhaps explain the position from their perspective.
Thank you, sir. So the position is with regarding education from this site, and it's particularly focused on primary education here, is that there is approximately 15 places required, and it is unclear at the moment as to whether that should be provided by extensions to one of the existing primary schools in Droitwich, or whether to deliver a new first school on site. And if a new first school is delivered on the site, that would be for one form of entry. This has been discussed with Marams extensively, and they are content that we either address this through safeguarding, through a statement of common ground, or potentially a modification to the policy. The reason for keeping that approach open is because the County Council is doing a piece of work with the existing first schools in Droitwich to assess whether they can expand or not, and that's not clear at the moment, and that piece of work is ongoing. Hence the it's a sort of twin track approach.
Thank you. I've got a note to myself. There's a main modification proposal in this respect, but now I'm unable to find it. Is that right?
I don't think there isn't a main modification to this policy. I mean, we do believe that there is grounds for a main modification in relation to education because the policy is silent on this. So we think there should be a reference within the policy setting out what the County Council have just said is that, you know, either appropriate provision on site or an off-site contribution would need to be provided for primary education. We're happy to put some words together to that effect. As Ms. Barker just said, the current preference is for off-site, but we think the policy wording should clarify that position. So we do think there is an omission there that needs to be addressed.
I think in previous sessions, we discussed the wording or the sort of the monitor and manage approach to education, where you deal with the situation just before the education authority at that time, and just to acknowledge the situation today may be different at some point in the future. So I'm assuming you think about wording along those lines.
We'll put something forward to you with the agent as well, who we've had discussions with around this point, so that there's not so much of it's not really an area of disagreement between us, but we think just something in the policy would be helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Yeah, well, the idea of having a primary school on site, it sort of exacerbates the problems we've been discussing with the road transport, because it isn't safe for cycling along, children to cycle or walk to that area, and the traffic situation is already congested. So I really don't think that it would be a suitable site for a primary school either, because the houses, there won't be sufficient children in that locality to justify the new school, whereas there are extra school places needed to the south of the town, I'm sure, but it's just the wrong place.
Okay, thank you. Murrens?
Thank you, sir. Two points, I think. On the question of the main modification, yes, we're entirely comfortable with having a conversation with the council about modification and what that might look like. Noting County Council's preferences for capacity improvements to be found at existing schools, but potential for a site here. This comes back to the comments that I made earlier about possible and probable. Of course, we can provide a site. We're content to do that. The decision would need to be made within the development management process, as indeed in accordance with your plan monitor and manage approach that you suggested. On the point about the site and whether it's a sensible location for school, I think, certainly my experience of planning for new schools, people can be forgiven for thinking that, of course, they're removed from the existing schools and therefore how are people going to get to them? What you see, of course, across the lifetime of a school is that I want to use the phrase reassign, but that's obviously a traffic highways phrase, but parents reassign where their children are going to go across the lifetime of a school being open. The working proposals we've got for the location of the school within the site is in that northwest corner, which obviously would be in close proximity to the pedestrian improvements that we've already alluded to. There are improvements, but both westwards along the northern part of the site into Droitwich, and there are also opportunities for improvements underneath the M5 as well. We have a package of improvements for connectivity, which you've already heard me refer to, which have been put in front of the council. We've started to discuss those with the County Council, and indeed the strategic transport modelers were aware of those at the time and comfortable with them. Over time, there's no reason to consider why a school in that location wouldn't be very well placed, actually, to serve the residents of Eastern Droitwich. Of course, it might be that an alternative site with an alternative school would be looked for on one of the other sides of Droitwich. Exactly the same set of circumstances would need to be considered in terms of how people would move around the town and access that site. So over time, we would expect to see a settling down, I suppose, of parental choice and where people would send their children, bearing in mind that there would be 300 homes here to serve that school straight away, if the County Council want to take the site for the school, which obviously is as it unknown. So just to double back, yeah, quite comfortable having a conversation about a main modification, and obviously Council putting that back in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Council wish to respond to that? No. Okay. Mr. Tesh?
Earlier stuff on education mentioned that there's a school at Hambleton, which is 4.2 miles, or I reckon 5 miles. It was precisely 5 when I went to vote last year, as well as Droitwich. It hasn't mentioned Hanbury School, where the majority of children on the existing development actually go. The strategic point that these discussions have been ongoing for 2.5 years now and seem to be going round and round. The statement of common ground say the preferred option now is education contribution, but yet we're still talking of whether to put a school there. And if we put it in the northwest corner, then I would suggest to you that people coming from Droitwich, either by car or walking, will have to go past the school in order to gain access of the site, in order to come back to the school. So there are a lot of logistics issues. I will conclude by saying that if this education matter and the way how it's been dealt with is typical of the way local councils assess up opportunities and reach decisions, then it is no wonder many of them are on the verge of bankruptcy. I don't think this has been approached in a professional manner whatsoever.
Any response from either the councils or the county council to any of the points raised, or?
Well, obviously, we've got to see whether the site is allocated in the first place before we nail down the education strategy. So these are pretty standard discussions between the education authority, the applicant, and the local authority. And by the sounds of it, there's potential for expansion of an existing school. Alternatively, there's potential for provision on site. What we can assure the concerns over the side of the table is appropriate education provision will be made by this development.
Thank you. Okay, that's reached our points in respect of that proposed allocation. Before we move on to the next, is any other points people wish to make on that? Or we'll move on to policy 60. No. Okay, we'll move on then. Do you wish to stay for the rest of this discussion? If not, we can just have a quick break for a minute if you're done now. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So it might be helpful because we're having a bit of a swap around as well.
Okay, we'll just adjourn until everyone's sorted themselves out. Thank you. Okay, everyone's settled. We'll now resume. Moving on now to policy SWDPR 60, which concerns the urban extensions that are in the existing plan being allocated again in this plan. So we'll start really with looking to the councils to explain the justification for reallocating these proposed urban extensions in this plan.
Thank you, sir. The justification for reallocation is relatively straightforward. Although some permissions have been granted development has commenced on these sites, they're not complete or fully built out. A local planning policy framework is still required until these sites are fully built out, amongst other things, to avoid a situation where, for example, future applications might come forward, including for amendments, and without the reallocation and site-specific policies, there could be a policy vacuum, and it wouldn't be adequate to just be relying on strategic policies and generic development management policies. These sites have been tested through the SA process, and the urban extensions are still consistent with NPPF paragraph 73, planning for large-scale developments. Thank you.
Thank you. No one's looking like to want to contribute at this point, so we'll move on to the next question, which is about the deliverability or developability of the sites as per the NPPF. So we've had some discussion already in the previous session about housing land supply relating to 5-year supply. Start with Worcester South. Just help us with our explanation here. So looking at the information set out in the footnote to the main modifications table, I think it says there's been 164 completions, 99 dwellings under construction, with 188 remaining with full permission. Those are set out in the housing land supply in, I think it's exam 30A, is it? I think it's in that one, isn't it, in the table? There's then the rest of the sites, which is the one subject to the outline permission 1300656, which is 2,204, I think. So there's 600 contribution from that anticipated in the 5-year supply. I think we'd be interested in knowing what is the justification for that number being set out in the supply. So I'm assuming there's no reserved matters permissions. Are there reserved matters applications?
So that particular land parcel is being promoted by Welbeck Strategic Land, and we have very recent communication from Welbeck that they are at a very advanced stage in terms of the sale of the entirety of that land parcel. We're advised that 3 reserved matters applications are imminent and are to be submitted to Malvern Hills District Council as the relevant local planning authority. 2 of those reserved matters applications would be for housing parcels, and 1 would be for an infrastructure package, including the Spine Road. And it's on that basis that we're confident that that residual part, a large residual part of the south of Worcester urban extension can come forward as we're envisaging within the trajectory.
I think our question is whether the figures in the trajectory are realistic given the point in which those reserved matters proposals have reached. So I think there's delivery of 75 in the year 25-26, which starts next week. I'm just really wondering how realistic that is, or whether it either it's moved along the trajectory. Well, actually, it's how far it is moved along the trajectory. I think that's the question, because it's not looking that realistic to expect 75 completions in the next year, given that the reserved matters applications hadn't been submitted yet.
No, sir, you're quite correct, and that is something that we've revised and will be submitting to you as part of a more comprehensive update to the trajectory. But as I mentioned a moment ago, information we've received directly from Welbeck Strategic Land quite recently, and they are envisaging having a house builder on site with 3 separate outlets, which gives us confidence that they can deliver at the rate they are advising us of. But appreciate you don't have all of that information in front of you at this precise moment in time.
No, that would be useful to have that. Thank you. So in terms of site C, which is Temple, I'll call it Lahern, but it's probably not pronounced like that locally. What is the evidence around that? What's the current planning status?
So development has more than commenced on that urban extension. We have 3 national house builders on site, Bloor Homes, Taylor Wimpey and Redrow. And quite significant completions to date. If you just bear with me a second. So as of March 2024, 472 dwellings completed with 111 under construction. Bloor Homes are building out from the north Martley Road in a southerly direction, and Taylor Wimpey and Redrow are working collaboratively to build out from the south northwards, so from the Crown East Island upwards. And the outline permissions were determined in a way that those two, if you like, halves of the urban extension dovetail very, very neatly, with one providing sports facilities, the other providing local centre and primary school.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have anything to add to that? James?
Thank you, sir. I don't want to extend the discussion. I agree with Mr. Rudge. The scheme is well progressed and is progressing. This is the 5th examination I've been to in relation to West of Worcester in 20 years. My overwhelming sense is that it is the last. The scheme is making good progress. And that is testimony to the efforts that Mr. Rudge and his team have put in to move the scheme from the allocation in 2016 to outline planning permissions in 2019 and 2020, reserve matters approval thereafter, and there is a stock of reserve matter permissions for Bloor, at least, who I appear for, to work through, which will, to my mind, certainly achieve the trajectory and the site's overall completion within the planned period. Just on the point about the reallocation, just very briefly, the choice before the council was to whether to save the policy effectively from the 2016 plan or to reallocate and adjust the policy. They did adjust the policy to increase its housing capacity to reflect the permissions that were granted. So in that sense, what the council did was clearly sensible and sound in that regard, and it does provide a policy framework for what I understand is the one parcel of land that hasn't currently got permission, which is the university land.
Mr. Rudge, anything on that? No further comments on that? Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next issue, which is regarding the provision of traveller sites in elements 60B and C. Mr. Rudge, if you could explain what the council is proposing and what point you've reached. I think there might be some main modifications.
Thank you, sir. Just by way of introduction, when the urban extensions were allocated in the currently adopted plan, it was considered appropriate to require on-site delivery of traveller accommodation. It's a matter of fact that in the consideration of the outline planning applications, that an alternative development management approach was considered acceptable, and therefore the councils sought developer contributions based on costs of land acquisition, utilities connections, and on-site infrastructure. As these sites are not fully built out, opportunities could still come forwards for on-site provision. And if this requirement was removed from SWDP R60 completely, again, a policy vacuum would exist, and the decision maker would be unclear about the principle of this land use in these locations, in that situation. The South Worcestershire councils have always been clear that the development management approach was application specific and about housing delivery, and those decisions do not set a precedent, and it's still appropriate to consider on-site provision through the plan-making process. It is fair to say that the situation with the Temple Lawn west of Worcester urban extension is different to the situation that we have for the south of Worcester Broom Hall urban extension, because the west of Worcester urban extension is so much further progressed. But as an example, if say the employment land on the west of Worcester allocation wasn't to come forward for employment purposes, it's possible that that could be deemed to be a suitable location for a traveller site. In the case of the south of Worcester urban extension, given that the land for circa 2,200 dwellings, local centre, sports facilities, and the list goes on, again, there could be opportunities. Not that we know that there will be, but there could be opportunities. And the councils consider that to have the option of considering both is entirely appropriate. The councils are satisfied with the development management developer contributions approach, but as you'll appreciate, I'm sure, there's a big difference between collecting contributions over a period of time with various trigger points related to dwelling occupations, but actually identifying land and securing it is another matter. On that basis, the councils are suggesting that there's an update to the footnotes, although those footnotes could be incorporated into the explanatory text. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next question was about provision of student accommodation. In the written statement on behalf of the university, they've explained that the situation over time has resolved itself, and they've effectively withdrawn their comments made at Regulation 19 because they've managed to secure land and development opportunities elsewhere for student accommodation. So I think we have what we need on that. Does anyone wants to add? Mr. Jones, you're looking like you might want to.
Not on that point, sir, but on the previous point. And it was really just to lend support to Mr. Rudge's position and the proposed modification. What we were keen to ensure was that the new policy, in effect, reflected what had been agreed through those planning permissions. I think we both independently have set out the various applications and various contributions, and it seemed to us as a practical measure to reflect the likelihood that if a new permission were required, the likelihood is that it would continue that pattern of financial contributions.
Thank you. Appreciate that, because from our point of view, we would have to decide if an approach in the plan was different than what's actually been approved on a scheme that's being built out. Would it actually be effective? So having that option is a way that I think it is a route to effectiveness. Thank you. Okay, and then briefly, I think just posed a question about element D of the policy in relation to Worcester 6 Business Park. I think the council's response is to, again, to keep the site in the plan until it's built out.
That's correct, sir. You're absolutely right that the explanatory text didn't fully reflect the up-to-date position. The councils have put forward an update, and that's included within the council's response to your MIQs, specifically 189.
Okay, thank you. Right, there's a number of suggested main modifications to policy 60. The point about provision of on-site, off-site gypsy and traveller accommodation, which we've already touched on. There's some corrections to, I think the name of the site's obviously evolved over time from Northern Barracks to Broomhall. That's could be included in the main modification. It's one of those things that could also be an additional modification if it's factual, but for completeness, it may as well be included here. There's the main modification suggested about sports facilities. Maybe explain that one.
Thank you, sir. The two updates in relation to Worcester West and Worcester South in terms of the sports facilities update are linked to the Statement of Common Ground with Sport England. So the wording has been revised based on their recommendations about how the two sites would take into account how the new facilities would be managed and operated through the phasing of delivery.
Thank you. And there's some other changes, I think factual changes in relation to numbers of dwellings, etc. Set out in the tables. And I think in respect of Worcester 6, some changes there, again, some factual changes in relation to names, etc., confirming that the 16-hectare figure is net, referring to distribution, and then adding in the use classes, e.g. B2 and B8. Yep. No. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, that gets us to the end of our discussions on those points. Has everyone said what they've come to say today? Maybe Mr. Jones is hoping this is his last time he comes and talks about this, but who knows? Okay. Okay, we're just wondering about what time we adjourn now. What time do we resume with the next matter, which is the Worcester sites? Just 11 minutes past 12 now. We're just thinking about make sure everyone is available when we resume and an appropriate time for lunch.
doesn't. It's a rollout
Yeah.
program, as far as I know.
Okay. Yeah, should we say 1:15? And we'll just check to make sure we have everyone we should have. And if for any reason someone thinks it's, you're right, it doesn't say not before 2 o'clock, but we'll get Mr. Kemp to check that, and we'll go for 1:15. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your contributions, and we should adjourn until 1:15.